The night I sent that text, I wasn't looking for a miracle. I was just hoping someone would answer. My phone was cracked across the top right corner, a thin silver line splitting the screen like lightning frozen in glass. I remember staring at it with my hand shaking so hard I could barely tap the letters. The apartment was too quiet in the way only a bad night can be quiet, when even the air feels like it is holding its breath. The lamp by my thrift store couch flickered once, then steadied, casting everything in that tired yellow glow that made my living room look smaller than it already was. My ribs ached every time I pulled in air, sharp enough to make me count each breath like it mattered. Outside, rain pressed against the windows in soft, relentless taps, and somewhere down the block a siren cried, then faded. I was supposed to text Emma. That was the plan. Emma always answered, even when she was asleep, even when she had work at 6 in the morning, even when I told her not to worry and she knew better than to listen. I opened our message thread with blurry eyes, typed with my thumb, and sent 3 words that felt heavier than anything I had ever written. Please help me. Then another message. He broke my ribs. Then I added my address because panic makes you practical in strange ways. I hit send before I could think, before I could second-guess myself, before pride could talk me out of needing someone. The message delivered instantly. I waited for the dots to appear. They didn't. I stared at the screen so long my vision started to blur at the edges. I checked the contact name again, and that was when my stomach dropped. One wrong digit. One stupid, tiny mistake. The message had gone to a number I didn't know. I almost threw the phone across the room. Instead, I pressed it tighter into my palm and tasted the kind of fear that turns your mouth dry. I started typing an apology. Sorry, wrong number. But before I could send it, my phone buzzed. Once. The sound cut through the room so sharply it made me jump. I looked down. Unknown number. Just 5 words. Wait right there. I read it 3 times. There was no question mark. No. Who is this? No, are you okay? No confusion. Just a command. Cold. Immediate. Certain. Wait right there. I should have been terrified. Maybe I was. But there was something in those words that felt different from danger. Not warm. Not kind. Just steady. Like whoever had sent them was already moving. I typed back with clumsy fingers. Who is this? The answer came almost at once. Someone who got your message. My chest tightened, and not just from the pain. Rain traced thin lines down the glass beside me. Headlights slid across my ceiling from a passing car, then disappeared. I looked around my apartment like I was seeing it for the first time. The chipped coffee mug on the counter, the blanket half falling off the couch, the grocery receipt still sitting on the floor by the door. Ordinary things. A small, ordinary life. And somehow, in less than a minute, it felt like I had stepped out of it. My phone buzzed again. Are you alone? I swallowed and stared at the words. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Outside, an engine rolled slowly down my street, deep and expensive, the kind of sound that did not belong near my building. I had no idea then that one wrong text was about to split my life into before and after. I only knew my heart was pounding. The rain was getting harder, and for the first time that night, someone had answered. The second my phone lit up again, I answered without thinking. Yes, I typed. I am alone. 3 dots appeared, vanished, then returned. Lock the door. Stay away from the windows. I looked at the deadbolt, already turned, and then at the thin blinds over the front window, where rain kept streaking the glass in pale silver lines. My apartment suddenly felt made of paper. I crossed the room carefully, one hand pressed against my side, and checked the lock anyway, as if touching it could make it stronger. The engine outside was still there now, low and steady, not idling like someone lost, but waiting like someone patient. I did not like how quickly my mind understood the difference. Who are you? I typed again. This time the answer took longer. Long enough for me to hear my own breathing. Long enough for the refrigerator in the kitchen to hum like it was the loudest thing in the world. Long enough for me to wonder whether I had made a terrible mistake by answering at all. Then the message came through. Adrian. No last name. Just Adrian. As if that should have meant something to me. It did not. But the confidence in it did. I stared at those 6 letters and imagined a man I had never met, somewhere out there in the rain, moving pieces of a night that had already slipped out of my hands. Another text arrived before I could respond. Is he coming back? My throat tightened. I looked toward the door, then toward the narrow hallway beyond it, half expecting to hear footsteps, a knock, some sound that would prove every fear in my chest was right. No, I typed. I do not think so. The reply came instantly. Do not think. No. Listen carefully. I should have bristled at the command in that message. On any other night, I would have. But there was something about the way he wrote that made panic slow down just enough for instructions to land. I forced myself to stand still. Rain hit the window harder. Somewhere close, a car door opened and shut with a heavy, expensive sound. Then my phone buzzed again. 2 men are coming to your door. Black coats. One of them will say Marco sent us. Do not open the door for anyone else. I read that text so many times the words stopped looking real. 2 men. My pulse tripped over itself. You sent people? I wrote. Yes. The answer came back before I could blink. My apartment, with its second-hand furniture and walls too thin to keep secrets, felt even smaller. I moved to the side of the door and waited, my fingers wrapped so tightly around my phone they had started to ache. 10 seconds later, there was a knock. Not loud, not impatient. 3 controlled taps. Every muscle in my body went rigid. Then a calm male voice came through the wood. Marco sent us, Miss Bennett. Hearing my last name from a stranger should have terrified me. Instead, it chilled me in a quieter, deeper way. I looked through the peephole and saw exactly what the text had promised. 2 men in dark coats, broad shoulders, still posture, rain shining on their sleeves. One of them held a black umbrella folded at his side. The other kept his hands visible, empty, respectful. My phone buzzed one last time. You are safe now. Open the door. I do not know what made me trust that message. Maybe it was the certainty. Maybe it was the fact that nobody in my world had ever sounded so sure that I would be protected. Or maybe I was simply too tired to hold myself together one more minute alone. My hand trembled as I reached for the deadbolt. I turned it slowly, heard the lock click, and realized that whatever waited on the other side of that door was going to change everything. The door opened onto cold rain air and the faint scent of expensive leather. The taller of the 2 men stepped back immediately, giving me space, as if he understood that one more inch in the wrong direction would send me running on instinct alone. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and dressed in a black coat so clean and precise it looked untouched by the weather. The other man stood half a step behind him, holding the folded umbrella and watching the hallway with the calm attention of someone who noticed everything. Neither of them looked surprised by the state I was in. Neither of them looked pitying either. Somehow, that made it easier to breathe. Miss Bennett, the taller one said, his voice low and steady. My name is Marco. We are here to take you somewhere safe. His words were careful, respectful, almost formal, but there was no softness in the way he said safe. It sounded less like comfort and more like a guarantee. I tightened my grip on my phone. I do not even know you, I said, and my voice came out thinner than I wanted. Marco gave a small nod, like he had expected that. No, ma'am, you do not. But Adrian sent us, and he does not send us twice for the same thing. There it was again. That name. Adrian. As if it should settle something in me. It did not. Not completely. But I noticed Marco had said it without hesitation, without title, without explanation, the way people say a name when they do not need to add anything else. Behind him, at the curb, a black SUV waited under the streetlight, rain sliding over its polished surface in silver ribbons. It looked too sleek, too expensive, too deliberate for my block of broken concrete steps and tired apartment buildings. The whole scene felt wrong in a way that was almost unreal, like someone had cut a frame out of another life and dropped it onto mine. I glanced back over my shoulder into my apartment. The lamp was still on. The throw blanket was still hanging off the couch. My coffee mug was still sitting on the counter where I had left it that morning before any of this happened. Everything looked ordinary. But I was not. I could feel that much. You should bring your phone, Marco said gently. If you have medication or identification, bring those too. We can wait 30 seconds. 30 seconds. He said it like time had edges, and he knew exactly how much of it I could afford. I nodded and stepped back inside. Every movement pulled at my side, reminding me that my body had not caught up to the strange stillness settling over the night. I grabbed my purse from the kitchen chair, slipped my charger inside without thinking, then paused in the middle of the room. It hit me all at once then, the absurdity of choosing what to carry while 2 strangers in black coats waited outside my door because of one wrong text. I looked at my reflection in the microwave glass. Pale face, rain-frizzed hair, eyes too wide. Not the kind of woman who belonged in the back of a luxury SUV sent by a man named Adrian. And yet, when I stepped back into the hallway, Marco took one look at me and moved aside like this had already been decided. He did not reach for me. He did not rush me. He simply held out his hand toward the stairs and said, "Watch your step, Miss Bennett." The rain had turned colder by the time we reached the sidewalk. The other man opened the rear door, and warm air drifted out, carrying the faint scent of cedar and something cleaner, sharper, like a hotel lobby that no one ordinary could afford. I hesitated with one hand on the door frame. Marco met my eyes, unreadable but patient. "You are almost there," he said. Almost where, I wanted to ask. But before I could, my phone buzzed in my hand. One new message. From Adrian. "You did well. That should not have done anything to me." It was only 3 words. But standing there in the rain, halfway between the life I knew and the one waiting inside that car, I felt something shift. Not trust. Not yet. Just the terrifying, undeniable sense that whoever Adrian was, he had already made room for me in his world. The door shut with a quiet, insulated thud that erased the rain in an instant. Inside the SUV, everything felt muted, expensive, unreal. The leather seat beneath me was warm, softer than anything I had ever sat on, and the air carried that same clean cedar scent, mixed now with the faint trace of cologne and something metallic from the storm outside. I pulled the door closed with both hands and sat there for a second, purse in my lap, phone still clutched in my fingers, as if I needed something familiar to keep me from floating right out of my own body. The other man slid into the front passenger seat. Marco got in beside him, and with one smooth motion the SUV eased away from the curb. No one asked me questions right away. No one turned around to stare. That silence should have felt awkward, but instead it felt practiced, like these men understood that the first kindness they could offer me was space. I watched my neighborhood pass by through the rain-streaked window. The laundromat on the corner with the flickering blue sign. The 24-hour gas station where I bought coffee when I was late for work. The diner with the cracked red booths and the pie case that never quite closed all the way. Ordinary places. Places I understood. They slid past one by one until even the streets started changing. The pavement smoother, the streetlights brighter, the buildings taller and cleaner. It felt like crossing some invisible line I had never noticed before, one that divided the city into the part people survived and the part people controlled. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I looked down so fast it made my ribs complain. Another message from Adrian. "Are you in the car?" I answered before I could think about why that mattered to me. "Yes." A pause. Then "Good. You will see a doctor in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. He said things in exact numbers, exact instructions, exact outcomes. There was something unsettling about that kind of certainty, especially to someone like me, whose life usually ran on late buses, overdraft fees, and hoping next month would be easier. I stared at his message until the screen dimmed. Then it lit again. "You are not obligated to speak to anyone until you are ready." I read that line twice, slower this time. It was the first thing he had said that did not sound like a command. It sounded like permission. My throat tightened for reasons I did not want to examine too closely. "Thank you," I typed. The response came almost immediately. "Rest. We are almost there." I leaned my head back against the seat and let the city blur by. In the front, Marco spoke quietly into an earpiece I had not noticed before. His voice was too low for me to make out every word, but I caught enough to understand the shape of the conversation. "We have her. 10 minutes out. Alert the doctor." He did not sound rushed. He sounded efficient, like a man moving through a plan that had already been built around me. That was the strangest part. Not the car. Not the men. Not even Adrian. It was the growing realization that the moment I sent that message, someone I had never met had decided I mattered enough to act. We turned down a narrower street lined with dark stone buildings and soft gold lights. Then the SUV slowed in front of a private entrance tucked beside a towering structure of glass and limestone. No sign, no crowd, just a covered drive, a doorman in a charcoal coat, and the quiet kind of luxury that did not need to announce itself. The rear door opened before I reached for it. Cool night air brushed my face, carrying the scent of wet pavement and polished stone. Marco turned then, finally meeting my eyes with something gentler than before. "We are here, Miss Bennett," he said. "The doctor is waiting upstairs." Upstairs. My pulse picked up again as I looked at the building rising above me. All dark windows and warm light, elegant enough to belong in a different version of this city. I stepped out carefully, one hand against my side, and the doorman moved aside as if he had been told to expect me. That was when I understood this was not random help from a stranger with a phone. This was power. Quiet, organized, immediate power. And somewhere above me, behind one of those lit windows, was the man who had answered. The elevator opened onto a floor so quiet, it almost felt sacred. Not empty, not abandoned, just controlled. The kind of silence that only exists in places where everything is handled before it becomes a problem. Marco walked half a step ahead of me, not close enough to crowd me, just near enough that I knew if I stumbled, he would notice before I hit the floor. The hallway was lined with dark wood panels and soft recessed lights that made the marble beneath my shoes glow like pale water. Somewhere nearby, I could hear the distant hum of filtered air and the muted chime of an elevator far away. No voices. No chaos. No hospital smell. This was not a place people found by accident. At the end of the hall, a woman in navy scrubs was already waiting beside an open door. She had silver-framed glasses, calm eyes, and the kind of expression that told me she had seen people on their worst nights before and did not need them to explain how they got there. "Miss Bennett," she said gently, as if my name belonged in a softer world than the one I had been living in. "I am Dr. Harris. Come with me." I glanced at Marco. He gave one small nod, then stepped back. He did not try to follow me inside. That mattered more than I wanted to admit. The examination room did not look like any clinic I had ever been in. No plastic chairs. No harsh fluorescent lights. No old magazines stacked in a corner. Everything was clean and modern and quietly expensive, with pale walls, warm lighting, and a wide window looking out over rain-dark city buildings. Dr. Harris worked carefully, speaking in a low, even voice while she checked my breathing, my pulse, and the ache spreading across my side. She asked simple questions. Could I take a deep breath? Did it hurt more when I turned? Was I dizzy? I answered as best I could, staring at the skyline beyond the glass while she moved with practiced efficiency. After a few minutes, she stepped back and gave me the kind of look doctors save for the truth they want to deliver without frightening you. "Nothing appears critical," she said. "But you are bruised, strained, and you need rest. We will do imaging to be certain, and I am giving you something for the pain." Relief came so fast, it almost embarrassed me. I had been holding myself together with pure stubbornness for so long that hearing "nothing appears critical" felt like someone loosening a fist around my chest. "Thank you," I whispered. Dr. Harris gave me a measured smile. "You should thank the man who made 3 calls in under 60 seconds and insisted I be here before you arrived." My eyes lifted to hers. "Adrian," I said before I could stop myself. She did not look surprised. "Yes." She wrote something down on a chart and then met my gaze over the top of it. "He can be difficult, but he is rarely wrong about urgency." Difficult. The word stayed with me. It was the first human description anyone had given me of him. Not powerful. Not dangerous. Not wealthy. Difficult. Something about that made him feel more real, which only made me more curious. A nurse came in, quiet and efficient, and handed me a glass of water and a small packet with instructions printed neatly on the front. Everything moved smoothly, almost invisibly, like an entire system had shifted into place around me without ever needing to be seen. When the exam was done, Dr. Harris told me I would be staying in a private suite down the hall for the night, maybe longer, depending on how I felt in the morning. I opened my mouth to protest, to say I could not afford any of this, that there had to be some mistake, that people like me did not stay in private suites above the city because a stranger had answered a text. But before I could speak, the door opened behind me. No knock, no rush, just a quiet turn of the handle and a presence that changed the temperature of the room without touching it. Dr. Harris straightened almost imperceptibly. The nurse stepped aside, and when I turned, the first thing I noticed about Adrian Moretti was not that he looked dangerous. It was that he looked exactly like the kind of man the entire room had already made space for. Adrian Moretti stood just inside the doorway with one hand in the pocket of a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. He was taller than I had imagined, broad through the shoulders, dark hair cut clean, the lines of his face too sharp to be called soft, and too controlled to be called careless. Everything about him looked deliberate. The watch at his wrist, The black tie loosened half an inch, as if he had been interrupted but not inconvenienced. Even the way he held still felt expensive. He did not rush toward me. He did not offer false comfort. He looked at me once, from my face to the side I was guarding with my hand, and something in his expression went quieter, colder, harder to read. Dr. Harris closed the chart in her hands. "She will need rest," she said. "No strain, no stress tonight. Imaging in the morning unless her breathing changes." Adrian gave one short nod without taking his eyes off me. Whatever Dr. Harris thought of him, she clearly did not expect him to argue. She exchanged a glance with the nurse. Then both women left the room with the smooth efficiency of people who understood when a conversation no longer belonged to them. The door shut softly behind them. For the first time since I had stepped into the SUV, the night felt narrow again. Just me. Just him. The city lights behind the window. I tightened my fingers around the edge of the exam table, suddenly aware of how plain I must have looked under those warm lights, in borrowed calm and a wrinkled sweater, facing a man who seemed built out of steel, money, and decisions. Adrian was the first to speak. "Are you in immediate pain right now?" It was not really a question, more like an assessment spoken aloud. I swallowed. "It hurts when I breathe too deep." His jaw tightened once, then settled. "Dr. Harris will adjust the medication if needed." His voice matched his texts. Low, precise, not loud, but impossible to ignore. There was no wasted language in him. I watched him take 2 measured steps farther into the room. Up close, the details sharpened. Eyes darker than I expected. A faint shadow at his jaw like the night had pulled at him too. No visible panic. No dramatic concern. Just absolute attention. And somehow that was more unsettling than any performance would have been. "Why did you help?" "Me?" I asked. The question left my mouth before pride could stop it. Adrian looked at me for a second that felt longer than it should have. "Because you asked." That was all he said at first. Just 4 words. But the room changed around them. No grand speech. No explanation about being a good man, because he clearly was not interested in being mistaken for one. Just a fact. "You asked." I let out a breath that caught halfway in my chest. "Most people would have thought it was not their business," I said. "Most people," he replied, "are very comfortable with delay." I did not know what to do with that answer. He said it so evenly, but there was something under it. Not anger exactly. More like history. More like a private rule he had been living by long before I accidentally stepped into it. He moved to the small table by the window where a glass bottle of water had been set beside a stack of folded linens. He poured a glass and set it within reach of me without asking whether I wanted it. The gesture should have felt controlling. Instead, it felt practical, thoughtful in a way that did not ask for credit. "You will stay here tonight," he said. "Maybe longer." I stared at him. "I cannot afford this." He did not even blink. "That is not your concern." "It is absolutely my concern." The words came out stronger than I felt, but I was too tired to make them pretty. "I do not even know who you are." Something almost invisible shifted in his face then. "Not offense. Interest." "Good," he said. "Keep that instinct. It is the only reason you are still cautious enough to ask the right question." I frowned at him. "That is not an answer." "No," Adrian said, and for the first time there was the faintest trace of something dry in his tone, not quite amusement, not quite warning. "It is not." He held my gaze a second longer, and I realized with a quiet shock that this man was used to rooms yielding to him, people yielding to him, outcomes yielding to him. But he was not asking me to yield. Not yet. He was watching to see if I would. "You do not owe me trust," he said at last. "But you will stay somewhere. Safe until I know no one can reach you." The words landed between us with all the weight of a command dressed as concern. I lifted my chin despite the ache in my side. "And if I say no?" Adrian was silent for 1 heartbeat. Then he stepped closer, close enough for his voice to lower, close enough for me to feel the full gravity of his attention without him laying a hand on me. "Then I will spend the rest of the night making sure you understand exactly what you are walking back into." For 1 suspended second, neither of us moved. The city glowed beyond the window in blurred ribbons of gold and white, rain softening the edges of everything below, but inside that room the air felt cut from glass. Adrian stood close enough for me to understand that he did not need to raise his voice to take control of a moment. He only had to decide it was his. I should have looked away. I did not. Maybe because I was exhausted. Maybe because some stubborn part of me had survived by refusing to fold for too long. Or maybe because I needed him to understand that being hurt was not the same thing as being helpless. I know what I am walking back into, I said. My voice was quieter now, but steadier. You are not the only person in this room who understands consequences. Something changed in his face at that. Not anger. Not surprise exactly. Recognition, maybe. Like he had expected fear and found resistance instead. Good, he said softly. Then stop pretending this is about money. I felt heat rise under my skin, sharp and immediate. It is about choice. The words came out before I could soften them. You do not get to decide where I stay just because you have a car, a doctor, and people who move when you tell them to. Adrian held my gaze without blinking. No, he said. I decide because the man who frightened you knows where you live, and right now your pride is less useful than a locked door with trained security behind it. The truth of that landed hard enough to make me hate how much it mattered. I looked away first, toward the rain on the window, toward the reflection of a woman I barely recognized. Small in the glass. Tired. One hand pressed to her side like she could hold herself together by force. When I spoke again, my voice sounded thinner than I wanted. You do not know anything about me. Adrian was quiet for a beat. Then he said, I know you texted for help only after you ran out of options. I know you apologized to a stranger before asking what he wanted in return. I know you are in pain and still arguing, because control is the last thing you have left tonight. I turned back so fast my ribs protested. He had not said any of it cruelly. That was the problem. He had said it like fact, and facts were harder to fight. You make me sound predictable, I said. No, Adrian replied. I make you sound human. The room went still again. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and shut. Soft footsteps passed, then faded. The whole floor seemed built to protect privacy, but for the first time all night, I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with being seen too clearly. Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his coat and set a slim black phone on the counter beside the water glass. That is for you, he said. Temporary. New number. Only 3 people have it. Marco, Dr. Harris, and me. I stared at the phone, then back at him. You already planned all of this. Yes. He did not apologize for it. He did not pretend otherwise. That blunt honesty should not have been comforting, but strangely, it was. I am not one of your employees, I said. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, more like the idea of one that had changed its mind. I am aware. Then stop talking to me like I am an assignment. Something flickered in his eyes then. A shadow of fatigue. Something older than this night. He slipped one hand out of his coat pocket and loosened his cuff as if the room had become tighter around him too. I am talking to you like someone I intend to keep alive, Claire. Hearing my first name in his voice did something unhelpful to the air between us. Not romantic. Not soft. Just suddenly personal. I hated that I noticed. I hated more that part of me felt. Steadier because of it. I looked down at the phone again, then at the folded blanket on the nearby chair, the glass of water, the skyline beyond the window. Every detail in that room said the same thing. He had already built the walls before I arrived. The only thing left for me to decide was whether I would stand inside them. How long? I asked finally. Adrian answered without pause. Tonight. Tomorrow. Longer if necessary. Until you can go back to your life without looking over your shoulder. I let out a slow breath and winced halfway through it. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He stepped back then, just one pace, but enough to return the space to me. That, more than anything, made me trust him a fraction more than I wanted to. You can hate the arrangement, he said. You can question me in the morning. You can tell me I am arrogant, controlling, and impossible, and I will probably not argue with most of it. But tonight, you stay. I looked at him, at the impossible calm of him, at the certainty that wrapped around every word he spoke, and realized he was not asking for surrender. He was asking for survival. And for the first time that night, I was tired enough to admit those were not the same thing. Fine, I said. Just for tonight. Adrian gave one slow nod, as if some invisible line had finally settled into place. Then he reached for the door, paused, and looked back at me with an expression so unreadable it almost felt careful. Get some sleep, Claire, he said. Tomorrow, I will explain why that message reached me. Sleep did not come easily. It came in fragments, thin and unreliable, the kind that leaves your body still tired and your mind too alert. Every time I drifted, some small sound pulled me back up again. The whisper of climate control through hidden vents. The distant hum of an elevator. Footsteps once, measured and quiet, passing beyond the suite door and then fading into silence. By the time pale morning light pressed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt like I had spent the whole night balanced between safety and suspicion, never fully giving myself to either. The suite looked different in daylight. Less mysterious. More dangerous, somehow, because now I could see the scale of it. The living area alone was larger than my entire apartment, all pale stone, dark wood, and glass so clean it barely seemed there at all. The city stretched beneath me in sharp silver lines, washed clean by the storm, every rooftop and avenue glittering under a cold New York morning. I was standing at the window with a mug of tea I had not asked for when the new phone Adrian had left me lit up on the kitchen counter. One message. Breakfast in 15 minutes. I stared at it over the steam rising from the cup. No greeting. No question. Just another certainty delivered like the day itself had taken orders from him. I should have ignored it out of principle. Instead, I found myself looking around the suite for a clock. 14 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Not loud. Not demanding. I opened it to find a woman in a charcoal dress carrying a tray with more food than I had seen in my apartment in a week. Fresh fruit, toast, eggs, orange juice, even a small bowl of oatmeal with cinnamon I could smell before she crossed the room. She smiled with professional warmth and set everything on the dining table by the window. Good morning, Miss Bennett. Mr. Moretti asked that you eat before your follow-up scan. Follow-up scan. Mr. Moretti. Even his concern arrived in polished layers. Thank you, I said carefully. The woman gave a polite nod, then paused just long enough to add, security has been notified not to allow any outside calls through unless you approve them first. My fingers tightened around the mug. Outside calls. As if my life had become a list of things to be filtered and permitted. After she left, I set the tea down harder than I meant to. That was the first moment the anger really arrived. Clean and clear and overdue. Not because I was ungrateful. I was not. Not because I did not understand why he had done it. I did. But because every hour I spent inside Adrian Moretti's world, another choice seemed to be made before I could make it myself. I had barely taken 2 bites of toast when the sweet phone on the wall rang. The sharp sound cut through the quiet like a blade. I froze for half a second, then crossed the room and picked up. Hello. Static whispered on the line. Then a voice I knew too well, low and familiar in all the worst ways. Claire. My whole body went cold. I said nothing. I could hear him breathing, could hear some distant traffic behind him, and just like that the expensive suite around me vanished. The city, the glass, the polished stone, none of it mattered. Fear did not care about square footage. I have been trying to reach you all night, Derek said. Where are you? I swallowed hard enough to hurt. You should not be calling me. A soft exhale came through the receiver, almost amused, almost tired, exactly the kind of tone that used to make me question my own memory. There you are, he said. You disappear, and suddenly I am the bad guy. Claire, come on. We both know you overreact when you are upset. My hand tightened around the phone so hard my knuckles ached. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to say something sharp and final and brave. Instead, I stood there with my heartbeat pounding in my ears while the old confusion tried to creep back in through the cracks. Then another sound entered the line. A click. Another voice, smooth and unmistakably calm. She is not taking your calls anymore. Silence slammed into the space after that. For the first time since I had known him, Derek sounded uncertain. Who is this? Adrian did not answer right away. When he did, his tone was almost quiet enough to be polite. The man standing between you and the next mistake you make. My breath caught. I turned toward the suite entrance without meaning to, and there he was, leaning one shoulder against the open doorway in a dark suit, one hand in his pocket, the morning light cutting a silver line along the edge of his jaw. He had not raised his voice. He had not hurried. He had simply arrived, taken the second receiver from somewhere beyond the door, and entered the moment as if it had always belonged to him. Derek said my name again, but weaker now, less certain of the ground beneath him. Adrian's gaze stayed on me, not the phone. That was the strangest part. His attention never left my face. You are done speaking to her, he said. Then he reached over, gently took the receiver from my hand, and ended the call. The receiver clicked softly into place, but the silence that followed was anything but soft. It felt heavy, exacting. The kind of silence that forces every nerve in your body to decide whether it is finally safe to stand down. I stayed where I was beside the wall phone, fingers still curved as if I were holding it, breath shallow, pulse unsteady. Adrian did not speak right away. He set the receiver back in its cradle with the same calm control he seemed to bring to everything else, then looked at me as if measuring whether the room itself had settled enough for me to stay standing in it. I hated that Derek could still do that to me. Reach through a line, a memory, a familiar tone, and turn a beautiful room into something smaller. Adrian crossed the distance between us without hurry and stopped just far enough away that I could choose whether to close the gap. Sit down, he said. Not cold this time. Not gentle either. Just certain, as if certainty was the only thing he knew how to offer when someone was shaking. I looked down and realized I was. Fine tremors through my hands. Tightness all through my shoulders. I moved to the dining chair nearest the window because it was the only thing my body seemed willing to do. Adrian pulled the other chair out, but did not sit in it at first. He stood with one hand resting on the back, his suit jacket open now, tie gone, the sunlight catching the clean line of his white shirt. In daylight he looked less like a stranger and more like a problem no ordinary life could survive untouched. I should have warned you he might try that, he said. I let out a brittle laugh that did not sound like me. Warned me that he would find a number inside a fortress in the sky. Adrian's expression did not change. This is not a fortress. It is a secured residence with predictable systems, and one of those systems failed this morning. I stared at him. That was your version of an apology. It is the version that comes with a correction already in motion, he said. Somewhere in the hall beyond the suite, a door opened, then shut. Soft footsteps. Low voices. The building was alive. Around us, discreet and polished and watchful. Adrian finally sat across from me and slid a sheet of paper across the table. A list. New phone number. Temporary address. Names. Marco Vale. Dr. Elise Harris. A woman named Lydia Cross marked as legal counsel. Another name. Emma Hayes, with the word approved beside it. I looked up sharply. You found Emma. Adrian met my gaze without blinking. You asked for her before you asked for anyone else. She is waiting for your call if you want to make it. My throat tightened. It was such a simple kindness I almost missed how carefully it had been placed in front of me. You called my best friend, found a lawyer, changed my phone, and built a private system around me overnight, I said. You do realize that sounds completely insane. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair. It sounds efficient. I stared at him for one stunned second, then let out the first real laugh I had managed since the night before. It was short and disbelieving and probably a little cracked around the edges, but it was real. Something in Adrian's face shifted at the sound. Not warmth exactly. Relief, maybe. Small enough that someone less exhausted would have missed it. He reached for the folder beside the tray and opened it toward me. Inside were printed appointment times, a scanned copy of building access restrictions, and a card with Lydia Cross's office number written by hand in dark ink. The details were almost absurd. He had not just rescued me. He had organized the aftermath. If you decide to file for a protective order, Lydia will walk you through it, he said. If you decide to relocate for a few weeks, Marco has 3 properties available. If you want to contact your employer, someone can arrange medical leave without disclosing your location. I looked at the page, then at him. You already planned every possible version of my life. No, Adrian said quietly. I planned options. Your life is still yours. The distinction landed harder than I expected, because for all his control, all his impossible reach, this was the first time since yesterday that I felt something besides protection pressing around me. Choice. It sat there on the table between the orange juice and untouched toast, hidden inside folders and names and clean paper edges. Why are you doing all this, really? I asked. Adrian was silent for a moment. Sunlight traced one side of his face, leaving the other in softer shadow. Because when someone asks for help, the first thing they lose is control, he said. I cannot change that part, but I can return as much of it as possible before the world teaches them to settle for less. The words sank into me slowly. Not dramatic, not rehearsed, too measured for either. He believed them. That was the dangerous part. I lowered my eyes to the list again and saw Emma's name, Lydia's number, the structured edges of a life being handed back to me one careful piece at a time. Then I looked up and found Adrian watching me, not with triumph, not with expectation, but with the same impossible steadiness he had sent through a cracked phone screen the night before. For the first time, I understood the difference between being controlled and being protected by someone powerful enough to do either. By noon, the rain had lifted completely, leaving the city bright and sharp beneath a pale blue sky that looked almost too clean for the kind of life Adrian seemed to live in. Dr. Harris had sent me down the hall for imaging, and by the time I returned to the suite, my side still ached but the fear around my breathing had loosened. Nothing broken, she had said. Severe bruising. Rest. Time. I should have felt grateful and only grateful, but gratitude was becoming a complicated thing inside Adrian Moretti's world. It came tied to questions, to favors I had not asked for in full, to a man who kept stepping in before I could decide whether I wanted him there. I found him in the living room near the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, standing over a long table scattered with papers that disappeared beneath his hand the second he noticed me. He moved like that all the time, I was starting to realize. Fast, but without visible hurry. Like the room changed shape around his decisions before anyone else caught up. Dr. Harris says you are not as fragile as you look, he said. I stopped a few feet away and folded my arms carefully. That is a terrible compliment. A faint line appeared beside his mouth. Almost a smile, gone too fast to hold. It was not intended as one. He gestured toward the sofa. Sit. I did, mostly because standing still hurt more than I wanted him to see. Sunlight spilled across the glass behind him, turning the skyline into a field of silver edges. In daylight, the suite felt less like a shelter and more like a command center disguised as luxury. Phones that never rang twice. Doors that opened only when expected. Men and women moving in silence just outside sight. Adrian remained standing a moment longer, then crossed to the bar cart by the wall and poured 2 glasses of water. He handed me one and took the chair opposite mine instead of the larger one at the head of the room. It was such a small choice, but it changed the air. Less interrogation. More conversation. I held the glass with both hands and watched him over the rim. You said this morning you would explain why my message reached you, I said. Adrian leaned back slightly, one arm resting on the chair, the other hand still around his glass. Yes. Then explain. He was quiet long enough that I thought he might refuse. Instead, his gaze shifted past me to the window, to something farther away than the city below. A few years ago, he said, I funded a domestic violence emergency line through a private network. Not public. Not official. Quiet. Limited. Built for people who do not trust systems with long wait times and polite delays. I frowned. My number was an emergency line. One of several, he said. Rotating. Filtered. Monitored by my security division at night and a separate team during the day. Severe risk language triggers escalation. Your message triggered escalation. I stared at him. You were telling me I accidentally texted a secret crisis line run by a man like you. Adrian's expression did not change. I am telling you that you reached a number designed to answer quickly. The fact that I saw it personally was timing. That answer should have felt impossible. Instead, it fit him too well. The secrecy. The speed. The private architecture hidden inside the city like veins under skin. Why would you build something like that? I asked. He did not answer right away. For the first time since I had met him, the control in his face shifted into something quieter. Not weakness. Not regret exactly. Memory, maybe. He set his glass down on the low table without looking at it. Because when I was 14, he said, my mother called 3 people in one night and none of them came in time. The room went still. The city kept shining beyond the glass, but everything inside me narrowed around that sentence. Adrian did not look at me when he spoke again. She was not weak. That is what people always misunderstand. She was patient, resourceful, careful. She believed if she managed everything correctly, the world would eventually become reasonable. His jaw tightened once, barely. It did not. I said nothing. It felt like the only respectful thing left to give him. He finally looked at me then, and there was no performance in his face at all. No practiced composure. Just the stripped-down truth of a man who had turned one old helplessness into an empire of control. I built the network because delay kills more quietly than people think, he said. And because I promised myself that if I ever had the reach to answer first, I would. Something in my chest shifted then, deeper than gratitude, deeper than fear. I had spent a day and a night trying to understand Adrian through power, money, and command. But this was the first thing that made sense of the man inside all of it. Not softness, not sainthood. A vow. A private one, sharpened into systems and men in black coats and doctors waiting before you arrived. I looked down at the water in my hands, then back at him. So when you read my message, I said slowly, you did not just see a stranger. Adrian held my gaze. No, he said. I saw a clock starting. The words landed with a force that had nothing to do with volume. I should have looked away. Instead, I sat there in the bright quiet of his impossible suite and understood, all at once, why this man moved so fast, why he spoke in certainties, why hesitation seemed to offend something ancient in him. My text had not interrupted his night. It had reached the oldest promise he had ever made. That afternoon settled into something quieter than the night before, but not simpler. There was a difference. Quiet let you hear things you had been outrunning. The city below the windows moved. In clean lines and distant noise, taxis threading through traffic, sunlight flashing over glass towers. The whole of Manhattan pretending it was orderly if you looked at it from high enough. Inside the suite, the silence kept circling back to Adrian's voice and that single sentence about his mother. It stayed with me while I stood at the kitchen counter pretending to read the instructions on my medication. It stayed with me when I finally called Emma and heard her cry from relief before she even finished saying my name. It stayed with me after Lydia Cross, calm and precise and terrifyingly competent, outlined legal options in the kind of language that made fear sound manageable. By evening, my side still hurt, but the panic had burned down into something steadier, something with edges. I found Adrian on the private terrace just beyond the living room, standing near the glass railing with the skyline opening behind him in a wash of gold and blue. The storm had scrubbed the air clean. The wind was cool enough to lift the ends of my hair and carry the scent of the river, steel, and the faint smoke of food carts somewhere far below. He had loosened his collar again, sleeves rolled, one hand around a coffee cup gone untouched. He looked like he belonged to the city in a way I never would. Not because he loved it, because he had learned how to command it. You should be resting, he said without turning. You should stop answering every difficult thing with instructions, I replied. That got his attention. He looked over his shoulder at me, then fully turned. In the fading light, his expression softened by half a degree. For him, that was practically an apology. I stepped out onto the terrace more slowly than I wanted to, my body still reminding me that healing had its own pride and did not care about mine. Adrian set the coffee down on the railing ledge and watched me cross the distance between us. Not hovering, not helping unless I asked. I noticed that now, the restraint in him, how carefully he managed it. Emma says I sound different, I said. Adrian waited. She says I sound like someone who finally believes she is not alone. For a moment, the city noise seemed to fall away. Adrian looked down at the street far below before answering. Are you? It was the first time he had asked me something without already knowing the answer he wanted. I folded my arms against the cool breeze and looked out beside him. I do not know yet, I said honestly, but I know I believe you would answer if I called. He was quiet long enough that I turned to look at him. The evening light caught the planes of his face, turning the hard edges warmer without making them less severe. He did not smile. Adrian did not seem like a man who wasted expressions, but something in his gaze shifted, deepened. I would, he said. Every time. The simplicity of it was almost unbearable. No embellishment. No promise dressed in pretty language. Just fact. I looked back at the skyline because it was suddenly easier to face 10 million strangers than one man who meant what he said that completely. Why, Adrian? My voice came out softer than I intended. Why me? The question hung between us, carried for a second by the wind. When he answered, his tone was lower than I had ever heard it. Because the first message I read from you was not dramatic. It was not written to persuade anyone. It was just honest. He paused, and when I looked at him again, he was watching me with that impossible stillness that always made the rest of the room disappear. You asked for help like someone who had learned not to expect it, he said. And I know exactly how dangerous that kind of silence becomes if no one interrupts it. My throat tightened. I had spent so much of my life minimizing things, softening them, translating my own fear into language other people could tolerate. But Adrian had understood the plain version, the unadorned one. I did not know what to do with a person who met the truth head-on instead of stepping around it. He leaned one forearm against the railing, close enough now that I could feel the heat of him in the cool air, not touching, never assuming. I was supposed to handle this from a distance, he said, almost to himself. That is how the system works. Triage, security, staff, protocol. His mouth shifted once, humorless. Then you texted me. The city lights came on one building at a time, little squares of gold blinking. Awake in the dusk, and suddenly the whole skyline looked like a field of signals. I let out a slow breath, careful of my side. So this was not part of the plan. Adrian met my eyes. No, Claire. You were not part of the plan. The way he said my name did not feel like possession. It felt like recognition. As if somewhere between the emergency line, the black SUV, the doctor, the new phone, and the unbearable precision of his care, I had become real to him in a way neither of us had intended. We stood there in the wind with the city opening beneath us, both of us too aware of how thin the line had become between rescue and something far more dangerous. Not because it was reckless, because it mattered. I looked down at the street far below and thought about all the versions of my life that could have continued without this one. Then I looked at Adrian and understood that whatever came next, I was no longer only the woman he had answered. I was the exception he had not seen coming. The next morning, I woke to sunlight instead of fear. That was new enough to feel suspicious. For a moment, I lay still in the quiet suite, staring at the pale ceiling and listening for the old panic, the sharp rush of memory that usually arrived before I was fully awake. It did not come. What came instead was the ache in my side, the low hum of the city beyond the glass, and the uncomfortable realization that safety could become its own kind of dependency if you stayed inside it too long. By the time I stepped into the living room, Adrian was already there, standing at the window with a phone in one hand, and the whole skyline spread behind him like it had reported for duty. He ended the call the second he saw me, slipped the phone into his pocket, and studied my face with that same impossible precision that missed nothing. You should still be resting, he said. I leaned one shoulder against the doorway and folded my arms carefully. You really need a second sentence. Adrian's expression shifted by the smallest degree. I have several. I just reserve them for useful moments. I should not have smiled. I did anyway. It vanished quickly when I noticed the folder on the coffee table, thick with papers, addresses, schedules, notes. My life, rearranged again before breakfast. I walked over slowly and opened it. A new apartment option. Security routes. Updated legal documents from Lydia. A transportation plan. 3 pages of contingencies. Each cleaner and more controlled than the life I had been living before he answered one mistaken message. Adrian watched me read without interrupting. Finally, I closed the folder and looked up. You are doing it again. His brow moved once. Doing what? Building a future around me before I say yes to it. He was quiet. The morning light caught the side of his face, sharp and gold and unreadable. It is called preparation, Claire. No, I said, holding his gaze. It is called deciding too much for someone who is still trying to hear herself think. The room stilled around us. Somewhere in the hall, a cart rolled past, soft wheels on polished floor, then vanished into silence. Adrian did not look angry. That would have been easier. He looked attentive. Worse, he looked as if my objection mattered. I moved closer to the table and rested one hand on the folder. I know you are trying to protect me. I know more than I did 2 days ago about why you move the way you do. But I am not another system for you to manage. I am not one more emergency line to reroute faster than the last. Something flashed in his eyes then, not offense but impact, like the truth had landed exactly where I meant it to. I am aware of the difference, he said. Are you? My voice stayed calm, but only because I had spent years learning how to keep anger elegant when fear would make it messy. Because every time I start to choose something for myself, there is already a driver waiting, a room arranged, a call screened, a plan printed. You make safety feel so efficient that it starts to look like permission. Adrian said nothing. I stepped closer still, close enough now to see the fine tension at the edge of his jaw. I do not need you to stop helping me, I said. I need you to stop replacing me inside my own life. The words hung there between us, clean and impossible to soften after the fact. For the first time since I had met him, Adrian looked not powerful, not cold, not certain. Just still, completely still, as if he had reached the edge of some internal instinct and found no clear order to give it. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. You think I am doing this for control? I held his gaze. I think control is the only language you trust when something matters. His exhale was so quiet I almost missed it. The city burned bright behind him, all glass and steel and movement, but inside the room something slower shifted into place. Adrian looked away first, toward the window, toward the towers catching morning light. When he spoke again, there was no command in it at all. That may be true. The admission was so rare, so unguarded, that it changed the air more than anger would have. He turned back to me, and there it was again, that strange restraint in him, the way he seemed to hold whole storms behind a still face. I do not know how to watch someone stand near danger without reducing the variables around them, he said. I learned young that if you leave too much to chance, chance collects its debt. I nodded once. I understand that. But I am not chance, Adrian. I am the person standing here telling you what I need. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he crossed to the coffee table, picked up the folder, and removed half the pages. He set the rest back down. You choose what stays, he said. The drivers, the legal meetings, the relocation options. Keep what helps. Refuse what is not. No one screens your calls unless you ask. No one moves you anywhere unless you agree. The shift was immediate and unmistakable. Not a surrender of power. Something harder for a man like him. A correction. I looked at the thinner folder on the table, then back at him. Just like that. Adrian's mouth moved with the faintest trace of irony. No, not just like that. But yes, I should have let the moment settle there. Instead, I took one more step and lowered my voice. Protection is not the same as ownership. I need you to know the difference if I am going to stay anywhere near your world. His eyes locked on mine. There was nothing casual in his expression now. No distance. No shield. When he answered, each word landed with deliberate weight. I know the difference, Claire. And if I forget it, you will remind me. For reasons I could not fully explain, that was the moment the balance shifted. Not when he sent the car. Not when he stopped Derek's call. Not even when he told me about his mother. It shifted when a man who could command almost anything chose, for one clear second, to listen instead. I looked at the folder, the sunlight, the impossible man standing in the middle of a room built around his authority, and realized I was no longer just surviving inside his protection. I was changing the rules of it. By late afternoon, the suite had stopped feeling like a place I had been hidden and started feeling like a place I had outgrown. That was the trouble with safety once it began to work. It gave you enough oxygen to remember who you were before fear started making decisions for you. Lydia had spent the morning walking me through paperwork, timelines, options, all of it laid out in language so clear it left no room for panic to pretend it was strategy. Emma had come by after lunch and cried the second she saw me, then laughed through the tears when I told her I was fine enough to be irritated, which apparently was her preferred sign of recovery. By the time the sun began lowering between the buildings, painting the city in bronze and shadow, I had made 3 choices of my own. I would file. I would not go back to my apartment yet, and I would leave this suite tonight. Not because Adrian had failed me, because he had not, because somewhere in the middle of all his impossible precision, I had remembered that being protected was supposed to help me return to myself, not disappear inside someone else's reach. He was in the living room when I told him, standing near the bar cart with his sleeves rolled and a glass of water untouched in his hand, the skyline burning behind him like the whole city had agreed to stage his silences properly. I am leaving tonight, I said. Adrian did not move at first. Then he set the glass down with quiet care and looked at me fully. The furnished apartment on West 72nd is secure, I added before he could answer. Lydia reviewed the lease terms. Emma knows the address. Marco does not need to drive me. I can go with her. A faint line appeared between his brows. You have been busy. I lifted one shoulder. You said I could choose what stays. His gaze rested on me for a long second, steady and unreadable. Then he nodded once. Yes, I did. There was no argument in him. That should have relieved me more than it did. Instead, something in my chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with pain. The suite was bright with evening light, every surface catching gold, every piece of glass reflecting some softer version of the city outside. It struck me then that I would always remember this place that way. Not as a prison, as an in-between. The room where a stranger with too much power had answered quickly enough to change the direction of my life. I picked up my bag from the chair by the window. It was still the same one I had grabbed in panic from my kitchen 2 nights earlier, but it felt lighter now, even full. More honest. Adrian crossed the room then, not hurried, not blocking my path, just coming to stand near enough that the air changed. Marco will still follow at a distance, he said. No direct contact unless you request it. The apartment building has private entry. The doorman has your photo only. No visitors without approval. I looked at him. There it is. The second sentence. That almost smile touched his mouth again, brief and restrained, gone before it could become comfortable. Some habits survive correction, he said. I should have laughed. Instead, I looked at him and felt the weight of everything neither of us was putting into easier words. The emergency line. The black SUV. The doctor's hands. The new phone. The files on the coffee table. The terrace in the wind. The moment he had listened when I asked him to stop replacing me inside my own life. Thank you, I said quietly. Adrian's expression shifted, not because of the words, but because of the way I said them. Not grateful in the small way. Grateful in the dangerous way. The kind that recognizes cost. You do not owe me that, he said. Maybe not. But, I mean it. I took a slow breath, careful of my side. You answered. You stayed. You did not make me smaller to feel safer. For a moment he did not speak. The city hummed beyond the glass. A helicopter moved in the distance, tiny against the orange sky. Somewhere deep in the building, an elevator chimed. Adrian glanced down, then back at me, and when he spoke his voice was lower than I had ever heard it. I could have made this easy for myself, Claire. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means I know how to hold on to things, he said. To secure them. To keep them near until the risk passes. His eyes held mine with a steadiness that made the rest of the room feel irrelevant. But if you stay near me, it cannot be because I built the walls well. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag. The sun dipped lower, and the whole room deepened into amber. Adrian took one final step closer, close enough for the truth between us to feel almost visible, close enough that I could hear the restraint inside every measured breath he took. If you stay, he said, it has to be because you choose me. The world seemed to narrow around that sentence. Not because it was a demand, because it was not. A man like Adrian Moretti could probably command 100 versions of loyalty before breakfast. But this, standing in the warm gold of evening with his entire city beneath him, he asked for nothing he could not be freely given. That was the part that undid me. I looked at the door, at my bag, at the life waiting beyond his reach. Then back at the man who had answered a stranger without hesitation and listened to her when she finally found the strength to answer back. I walked to the door, hand on the handle, heart unsteady for reasons that no longer sounded like fear. I opened it. The hallway waited, quiet and polished, and leading outward into the rest of my life. Then I turned around. Adrian had not moved. He was watching me with that same impossible stillness, but there was something raw beneath it now. Something rare enough to make power look almost fragile. I crossed the room before I could overthink the courage of it, and stopped in front of him. I am leaving tonight, I said softly, but I am not walking away from this. The breath he let out was nearly silent. Not relief exactly. More like the sound a man makes when the outcome matters more than he ever intended. I reached for the new phone on the table and slipped it into my bag. Keep the distance if you need it, I said, but do not disappear on me either. Adrian looked at me as if the request had landed somewhere no one else had been allowed near. I will not, he said, and for the first time, I believed a future not because it was guaranteed, but because it had been chosen carefully by two people who understood what it cost to mean it. I left the suite a few minutes later with Emma at my side and the city opening below us in lights. But all the way down, one thought stayed with me, clear and quiet and true. Some men rule through fear, some through force. Adrian Moretti had enough power for both. And still, the first real thing he gave me was the right to choose.